The Odyssey. You read it? There's a new movie coming out this month that takes on this centuries-old adventure story about one man's quest to return home. Considered one of the oldest works of Western literature, the Odyssey still fascinates and resonates with modern audiences. Why is that? And what does it have to tell us about war and its aftermath? Spoilers ahead. Good afternoon, and thank you for stopping by Across the Fence. I'm Keith Silva, in for Amy Finley. Friday, July 17th is a day many film buffs, me included, have had circled on their calendar for a few years now. It's the premiere of The Odyssey by one of today's leading filmmakers, Christopher Nolan. Can Nolan do for Odysseus what he did for Batman? How will a story from Greek mythology about literal gods and monsters translate for modern audiences? To discuss these and other questions, we present a primer for The Odyssey. And to help us keep track of all the players on the scorecard, we've invited John Franklin, professor of classics at the University of Vermont. John, welcome back to Across the Fence.
Thanks, Keith. Good to see you again.
Good to see you as always. Homecomings, homegoings, that's kind of the story that we're talking about here. Can you sum up The Odyssey and points, extra points, if you can do it in less than 10 seconds?
Sure. So The Odyssey is the homecoming journey of Odysseus from the Trojan War, which took 10 years, the war did, but his homecoming journey also takes 10 years. So there's an equal balance of the war experience and the homecoming experience.
Time. Nice.
Much more to say.
much more to say. Okay, so is Odysseus is the protagonist. Is he a good guy?
So if I may quote The Big Lebowski, I don't want to say a hero, because what's a hero? But sometimes there's a guy. So is he a good guy? I would say he's a guy. The first line of the poem, Andromoi anapamusa polytropon. Muse, tell me about a guy, a man. So I think it's important that he is presented as sort of a generic type almost. He's any man or a man. Famously in one episode, he's nobody. But he's sort of everybody and nobody. So is he a good guy? He's a complicated guy.
He's definitely a complex and complicated guy. Okay, so if he's the protagonist, who's the antagonist of the story?
Well, I suppose you could identify two. One is the god Poseidon, who is foiling his journey home because he's angry that Odysseus has blinded his son, the Cyclops. On the other hand, when Odysseus gets home and he finds his palace or his house has been taken over by suitors for his wife, and he has to take care of the suitors, he kills them all, you could argue that they're a different kind of antagonist.
Okay, so complex guy, complex story.
Yep.
I think for something that is as old as the Odyssey is, there are a lot of moving pieces, a lot of things going on constantly. It's not a straight through beginning, middle, and end. It's kind of a starts towards the end, comes back to the beginning, spends some time in the middle, goes back to before the beginning.
That's right. There's flashbacks and jump arounds, especially in the middle. And when people think of the Odyssey, they probably think of all the adventures with the Cyclops and sailing around on monsters. That all happens in 4 out of 24 books in the middle as a flashback that Odysseus narrates.
Okay.
So it's really a minority of the poem. The poem is mostly about him coming home, and a full half of it is when he's landed at home and has to work his way back into the palace and defeat the suitors.
Okay. Telemachus, this is Odysseus' son.
Correct.
What's his role in the story?
So he is the son that was an infant when Odysseus went off to war, and it's now been almost 20 years, so he's coming of age in a palace that his mother's been running, but has been infested within the last several years by her suitors. So he heads off to get news about his father in the first part of the poem. He comes back, there's a meetup with Odysseus when he comes back, and together as father and son team, they scheme to rid the house of the pests.
Okay.
Odysseus tried not to go to the war. He was tricked by another recruiting Greek who threw his baby in front of a plow. Odysseus pretended that he was insane, and Odysseus refused to run his own baby over, and therefore he was revealed as not crazy.
Okay, and Telemachus was that baby.
So he's never met his dad. He's only ever heard about his dad.
Okay. And Penelope, another important. This is Odysseus' wife, the ultimate, wife, the one we put on the pedestal.
Right.
Besides all that, why is Penelope so important to the story?
Well, she's credited with playing for time against the suitors. She famously is weaving a shroud for her father-in-law's burial. She says, "I won't choose a new husband until I've finished this duty that I have towards my previous husband's father. And every night she takes out the threads, and so that it never gets done until one of the housemaids reveals the trick to the suitors, and then the material hits the fan, right? Which is at the point where the story picks up.
Right, where the story starts. Okay, so, but regardless of his dutiful wife waiting back at home, weaving shrouds, when we first meet Odysseus, he is living with Calypso. Who is Calypso?
So Calypso is a nymph, so she's a minor goddess. Her name means the hider, someone that hides somebody away. So in a sense, you could say that Odysseus has been with her for 7 years. So he's been removed from his homeward journey and hidden away in the middle of the sea, the belly of the sea, which is a way of saying, in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. He's been detained by her. I mean, so the poem says that he spends his days on the shore looking for passing boats and weeping for his homeland, but he spends his nights in steamy lovemaking in the cave.
Oh, okay.
And there's an interesting, you could explore what that's all about. But he really wants to go home,
But
even though his wife is mortal and can never compete with Calypso, nevertheless, there's no place like home.
Right. So this brings up a very important part of this story, and it's the previous story, the Iliad. The gods, mythological gods, as you said, Poseidon, maybe an antagonist in the Odyssey, play an important role in the story. What role is that? Are they just moving the pieces on the chessboard? What are they doing?
A little less so than in the Iliad. People do talk about divine machinery, and it is present in the Odyssey, but there's fewer gods involved. There's Athena, who is Odysseus' patron and is often by his side with advice or actual help in killing the suitors. So she plays an important role. There's Zeus, who's up sort of looking down on everything, and Athena petitions him, Odysseus has suffered enough, let's get him home. Zeus is like, well, mortals always blame us for their problems, but they bring lots on themselves. So he's there in an important framework of, what's the role of free will and destiny and so on. Poseidon does play a quite active role, as I mentioned earlier. Hermes is in there as a messenger telling Calypso to release Odysseus finally. But those are the key divine players in this poem.
But unlike the Iliad, they're not fighting side by side.
Correct.
Correct. Okay, so divine players, I like that. When many people think of the Odyssey, they think of the Trojan Horse. So is it a set piece in the Odyssey? It takes up, you said, there's 4 books of gods and monsters. Is the Trojan Horse 3 of those 4 books?
It is not. You might think it is because it's so famous and so important to the end of the Trojan War. It was Odysseus' idea. All the soldiers get in to the Trojan Horse. The Trojans take it into the city. By night, they come out and they open the gates and they sack the city. That is not told in the Odyssey. It's mentioned. So a singer that is at a feast where Odysseus is present sings the story of it and brings Odysseus to tears, but it's not narrated in its full extent.
Okay.
So we could say that the poet of the Odyssey knows about that episode because it's a traditional episode, and his audience, readers or listeners in the original context, also knew about it very well, and therefore it wasn't necessary to tell it because you just activate it by alluding to it.
Okay, so Trojan Horse, not really in the Odyssey, but there's a good reason for that. Okay, John, now you're going to tell me the Cyclops isn't in the Odyssey.
The Cyclops is in the Odyssey. Okay. It's one of the best episodes. So it is in those 4 books where he's telling his adventures, and it occupies close to a quarter of it. So the whole famous story where they put ashore, the guys have a bad feeling about this, but Odysseus says, no, we're going in. I demand hospitality as a royal traveler. He goes into the cave. The Cyclops is out, so they help themselves to some cheese. There's lots of fine cheeses there. And the Cyclops comes home and says, fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman.
Or Greek.
A Greekman. And, so he starts eating the men, one by one for snacks, and Odysseus eventually has to, they end up blinding him with a huge stake. I don't want to spoil the whole thing, but this, this is one of the most exciting episodes.
Okay. You've been teaching this book to students. What is their reaction for something that is, where you said not a story but a poem? So what is student reaction?
Sometimes there's the guy. So student reactions vary. Generally, students are very excited by it because there's so many universal themes that are so, brilliantly expressed and so movingly expressed. So there's something in there for everybody. Now, it's not the easiest read. Ancient literature often is not. Part of that is because the original audience knew the story and the poet can move around with it. There's lots and lots of characters and names that you won't know the first time, and so that can be hard to keep track of. So I would say in general, student reaction is very positive, but you have to move slowly and sort of guide people with it.
Okay, Professor, the book, the version or the translation of the Odyssey that the movie is based on is this one by Emily Wilson, well known. Which translation should you read to get the right one?
Most people these days are reading the Emily Wilson. It came out in 2018, and there was a lot of excitement about it. First female translator of the Odyssey, among other things. It is written in iambic pentameters, which is a standard traditional English verse. So that gives you a flavor for the original poetic rhythm of the Greek, a different meter in the Greek, but it gives you an approximation of that experience. At the same time, it's straightforward and clear language, so it's quite readable. So people are pretty excited about it. It also translates some terms, instead of servant, you get slave. So it brings some of the cultural realities a little more to the fore. So a lot of people are reading this. Prior to this, most people in university courses or ordinary reading experience, people would choose the Fagles, Robert Fagles, very, very readable. Also highly recommended.
Okay, and in your circles, is there excitement for the movie?
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, so on my Classics social media feeds, it's nonstop speculation about how will Nolan disappoint us, or how will he, will he put 5th century vases in where we expect Bronze Age vases, and that sort of thing. But it should be a great event.
Okay, one thing that the Odyssey has been used for, outside of just the students that you teach in courses, is you've used it with veterans.
Correct.
How is the Odyssey used as a tool for veterans?
So a lot of this goes back to a clinician in Boston called Jonathan Shea, who wrote 2 works, Achilles in Vietnam and Odysseus in America. And in this work, he gathered stories from Vietnam veterans, and then he read the Odyssey against those veterans' battlefield and homecoming experiences, and he found a lot of striking correspondences. And in reading the Odyssey with veterans, which a number of groups do, it goes back to Roberta Stewart at Dartmouth, and then on her model we did it at UVM, and other groups are doing it at VA centers and so on. It's extremely successful as I don't want to say bibliotherapy, it's not really about that, it's just a homecoming story that a lot of soldiers can connect with. And Homer's audience, most of them fought as soldiers in their lifetime. And so it's not really surprising that there's a lot of kind of deep knowledge and familiarity with the war experience in the poem. And scholars didn't really appreciate the kind of vitality of that dimension before we started reading it with veterans. And those guys and women are just, can be like, oh yeah, that's a thing, that's a thing, that's a thing. And a passage that you might not have thought about, suddenly they're like bringing it to life for you and saying, that's just like what it was like when I got home.
Okay, amazing. John, I could talk to you about this forever. My thanks to the team behind the scenes here at WCAX, who are always trying to get us home as soon as possible. I'm Keith Silva. This is Across the Fence. Thanks for being part of our family.